The evening air was cool, carrying the sweet smell of flowers. Sophia stepped out of a black Mercedes-Benz and looked at the big mansion in front of her. The Ocon family house was one of the most beautiful in Benin City. A man in a neat black suit and white gloves opened the door for her. Inside, the house was bright with golden lights. A musician played soft jazz while rich guests laughed, sipped champagne, and talked in low voices. Everything looked perfect. Sophia adjusted her gold bracelet and took a deep breath. She hadn't been in Benin City for years, and this was her first big event since coming back. But more than anything, she knew he would be here. David. The last time she saw him was in Paris. They had fought by the river, their voices sharp with pain. In the end, she had walked away, believing their love was impossible. But life has a way of bringing people back together. Sophia, a deep voice said behind her. She turned around, slowly. There he was, David Omoregi. He looked even better than before, tall, strong, and confident. His black tuxedo fit perfectly, and his deep brown skin glowed under the lights. His sharp eyes locked onto hers, and a small smile formed on his lips. For a moment, they just stared at each other. The party went on, but to Sophia, it felt like time had stopped. "You haven't changed," David said smoothly. She lifted her chin. "And you're still as charming as ever." He chuckled. "I try." She smiled, shaking her head. "So, how have you been, David?" "I've been good," he said, stepping closer. "Very good. And you? Still breaking hearts in Paris?" She raised an eyebrow. "Wouldn't you like to know?" His soft laughter made her heart tighten. It felt so familiar. "Come," he said, offering his arm. "Let's talk somewhere quieter." She hesitated for a moment, then took his arm. He led her through the house and onto a quiet balcony. From there, they could see the city lights. The stars twinkled in the sky like tiny diamonds. David leaned against the railing. "So tell me, what brings you back to Benin City? I thought you said you'd never return." She sighed. "I did say that. But sometimes, life takes us back to the places we tried to leave behind." David's eyes searched hers. "And where do you belong, Sophia?" Her heart beat fast. She didn't know if it was because of the night air or the way he was looking at her. "I don't know anymore," she whispered. David studied her face for a moment. Then he reached out and gently touched her cheek. His fingers were warm. "Maybe," he said softly, "you belong here." Sophia's breath caught in her throat. She had spent years trying to forget this feeling. But standing here, with David so close, she couldn't ignore it anymore. "You haven't changed," he whispered, his fingers brushing against her skin. "Still strong, still beautiful." She swallowed hard. "And you, David? Have you changed?" His face grew serious. "I've learned something. Some people, no matter how far they go, will always find their way back to each other." Her lips parted, but before she could answer, they heard footsteps. "David, there you are." A woman in a red dress walked toward them. She was stunning, with long wavy hair and a confident smile. David's face changed for just a second before he turned to the woman. "Vanessa?" Sophia stiffened. She had heard of Vanessa, David's new companion. People had seen them together in London, Dubai, and New York. "Am I interrupting something?" Vanessa asked, looking between them. Sophia forced a smile. "Not at all. We were just catching up." David's eyes stayed on Sophia for a moment, then he turned to Vanessa. "I'll be inside soon." Vanessa's smile didn't fade, but her eyes were sharp. She nodded and walked back to the party. Sophia exhaled slowly. "Looks like you've been busy." David sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. It's not what you think. She let out a small laugh. Oh? And what do I think? That she means nothing to me. Silence hung between them. You still know the right words to say, Sophia finally said. And you, he replied, still know how to run away. His words hit her heart like a sharp knife. Good night, David. She turned and walked back inside, her chest tight with emotion. But as she left, she knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end, not even close. The music inside the mansion seemed louder as Sophia walked back into the party, but it wasn't enough to drown out her thoughts. Her heart was still racing from her conversation with David. He still had the same effect on her, and she hated it. She made her way to the bar, needing a drink to steady her nerves. A glass of white wine, please, she said to the bartender. As she waited, she felt a presence beside her. She turned, half expecting to see David again, but it was her best friend, Tolu. I saw you outside, Tolu said, raising an eyebrow. Alone. With David. Sophia sighed and took a sip of her drink. It wasn't what it looked like. Tolu smirked. Really? Because from where I was standing, it looked like unfinished business. Sophia rolled her eyes. It's been years, Tolu. We're not the same people we were back then. Tolu leaned in, lowering her voice. So why does it still bother you that Vanessa is in the picture? Sophia stiffened, but quickly composed herself. I don't care about Vanessa. Tolu gave her a knowing look. If you say so. Before Sophia could respond, a deep voice interrupted them. Ladies. David was back. Tolu glanced between them before giving Sophia a small smirk. I'll leave you two to talk. She grabbed her drink and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Sophia turned to David, trying to ignore the way her pulse quickened. Did you need something? David studied her, his expression unreadable. Just some honesty. She scoffed. Honesty about what? About why you left that night in Paris. About why you're pretending like none of this matters. Sophia clenched her jaw. David, that was a long time ago. But it still matters. His voice was quiet, but firm. She exhaled sharply. David, please. We both moved on. You have Vanessa now. David let out a humorless chuckle. You think Vanessa is my future? He shook his head. You still don't get it, do you? Sophia frowned, confused. Get what? David took a step closer, lowering his voice. That I never stopped loving you. Her breath caught in her throat. I waited, Sophia. For years, I hoped you'd come back. His gaze was intense, his words raw. And now you're here, acting like we were nothing. Sophia's hands trembled slightly. She wasn't prepared for this conversation. David, she whispered. It's not that simple. Then make it simple, he said, his voice almost desperate. She closed her eyes for a moment, fighting the emotions rushing through her. But before she could respond, Vanessa appeared again. David, darling, she said, slipping her hand through his arm. They're waiting for us at the table. David's jaw tightened, but he nodded. I'll be there soon. Vanessa's eyes flickered to Sophia, her smile polite but firm. Sophia, it was lovely seeing you again. Sophia forced a smile. You too. As Vanessa led David away, Sophia finally exhaled, feeling like she had been holding her breath the entire time. Tolu returned to her side, watching them walk away. So, are you still going to pretend that you don't care? Sophia swallowed hard. I don't know, Tolu. But deep down, she did know. This wasn't over. It had never been over. The night felt longer than usual. Even as Sophia smiled and nodded at the endless stream of guests who stopped to greet her, her mind was elsewhere. Every glance she stole in David's direction only made things worse. He was seated across the room with Vanessa, but even from this distance, Sophia could tell he wasn't really present. His shoulders were tense, his expression forced. Tolu leaned in, whispering, "You know, if you keep staring at him like that, Vanessa might pour her drink on you." Sophia snapped out of her thoughts, shaking her head. "I am not staring." Tolu smirked. "Sure, and I'm the Queen of England." Sophia sighed. "Can we talk about something else?" "Fine," Tolu said, taking a sip of her wine. "Let's talk about the real reason you're back in Benin." Sophia stiffened. "You told me it was just business, but I don't believe you," Tolu continued. "Because if it was just business, you wouldn't look like you're about to pass out every time David walks into a room." Sophia hesitated, her fingers tightening around her glass. "I had to come back, Tolu. Not just for work, but because I needed to face my past." Tolu gave her a long look. "And does facing your past include finally telling David the truth?" Sophia's heart skipped a beat. Before she could answer, a waiter approached with a note on a small silver tray. "For you, madam." She took it, unfolding the crisp white paper. "Meet me at the garden in 5 minutes." There was no name, but she didn't need one. She knew exactly who it was from. Tolu peeked at the note. "You going?" Sophia hesitated for a second before rising to her feet. "I'll be back." Tolu grinned. "Good luck." The garden behind the mansion was quiet, with only the sound of crickets and the soft rustling of leaves in the night breeze. The lanterns lining the stone pathway cast a warm, golden glow. David was already there, standing near the fountain, his hands in his pockets. Sophia inhaled deeply and walked toward him. "I thought you were busy entertaining your girlfriend," she said, her voice cool. David turned, his eyes locking onto hers. "You know she's not my girlfriend." Sophia folded her arms. "Oh? Then what is she?" "A distraction." Sophia's breath hitched, but she quickly masked it. "That's not fair to her." David took a slow step closer. "And what about what's fair to me?" Sophia looked away, her heart pounding. "David, we can't do this." "Why not?" His voice was quiet but firm. "Because you're scared?" She swallowed hard. "Because we already tried, and we failed." David exhaled. "No, Sophia." You walked away. Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. "I had my reasons," she whispered. David shook his head. "Then tell me, because I've spent years trying to understand why you left when we had everything." Sophia closed her eyes briefly. "I was afraid, David. Afraid that love wasn't enough. That eventually, we'd destroy each other." David reached out, gently tilting her chin up so she had no choice but to look at him. "And what about now?" Her throat tightened. "I don't know," she admitted. David's gaze searched hers, and for the first time in a long time, she saw something in his eyes that scared her more than anything. Hope. "You do know," he murmured. "You just don't want to say it." Sophia's resolve wavered. "David." Before she could stop herself, she reached up, her fingers brushing against his. The warmth of his touch sent shivers through her. He leaned in slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me to stop, and I will." Sophia opened her mouth, but no words came. Because deep down, she didn't want him to stop. But before anything could happen, they heard footsteps approaching. David cursed under his breath, stepping back just as Vanessa appeared. "There you are," Vanessa said smoothly, though there was a sharpness in her eyes. "I was looking for you." David clenched his jaw. "Vanessa, not now." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "But it is now," David. She turned to Sophia. I think it's time we all stop pretending. Sophia frowned. Pretending? Vanessa crossed her arms. That there isn't something much bigger going on here. Sophia's stomach twisted. David's expression darkened. Vanessa, this isn't your business. Vanessa tilted her head. Isn't it? Because I know the truth, David. And I think Sophia does too. Sophia felt a chill run down her spine. What truth? Vanessa's lips curled into a knowing smile. That the reason you really left Paris wasn't because you were afraid of love. She took a slow step forward, her voice soft but deadly. It was because of what you were hiding. Sophia's breath caught. David turned to her, confusion flickering across his face. What is she talking about? Sophia's pulse pounded in her ears. Because Vanessa was right. There was something she had never told David. Something that could change everything. Sophia felt her throat go dry. The weight of Vanessa's words pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe. She had buried the truth for years, convinced it was for the best. But now, standing in front of David, with Vanessa watching like a predator waiting for the final blow, she knew there was no escape. David's eyes searched hers, his voice laced with confusion and frustration. Sophia, what is she talking about? Sophia took a shaky breath, her hands trembling at her sides. She could feel Vanessa's satisfaction radiating from her stance, but she refused to let this woman control the moment. She lifted her chin. David, there's something I never told you. Vanessa let out a short, amused laugh. Oh, this should be good. David shot Vanessa a warning glare. Enough. He turned back to Sophia. Tell me. Sophia's heart pounded. Her mind screamed at her to run, to make an excuse, but she was tired of running. She owed him the truth. She took a deep breath. David, when I left Paris, it wasn't just because I was afraid. I was pregnant. The silence that followed was deafening. David's expression shifted from confusion to shock. He took a step back, as if the words had physically hit him. What? Sophia's eyes stung with unshed tears. I found out a few weeks before we fought by the Seine. I didn't know how to tell you. And then, after the way things ended, I thought it was best if I kept it to myself. David's jaw tightened, his hands balling into fists at his sides. You thought it was best to keep my child from me. Tears slipped down Sophia's cheeks. I thought I was doing the right thing. You were traveling all the time, handling business deals in London, New York, Dubai. You had no time for a family. And after the way we fought, I didn't think you wanted anything to do with me. David's breath came out in short, uneven bursts. He looked away, his chest rising and falling with controlled rage. Do I have a son or a daughter? Sophia swallowed hard. A son. Vanessa let out an exaggerated gasp. Wow. And here I thought this night couldn't get any more interesting. David ignored her, his gaze locked onto Sophia. Where is he? Sophia hesitated, wiping her tears. His name is Adrian. He's in London with my mother. He's 4 years old. David let out a slow, shaky breath, as if trying to process everything at once. Vanessa smirked. Well, David, looks like you've got a little surprise waiting for you overseas. I guess this changes everything, doesn't it? David turned to Vanessa, his voice cold. Get out. Vanessa raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? I said get out, David repeated, his voice firm. This isn't your business. Vanessa scoffed. Wow, 1 minute we're the perfect couple, the next I'm dismissed like a secretary who brought the wrong coffee. She shook her head. You know what? I'll go. But don't think for a second this is over. She turned on her heels and walked away, her dress shimmering under the garden lights. Sophia sniffled, wrapping her arms around herself. She felt exposed, raw, like her whole world had just unraveled. David ran a hand over his face, his voice quieter now. 4 years, Sophia? Sophia's voice trembled. I didn't know how to tell you. And then too much time passed. I was scared, David. David let out a slow breath, his anger giving way to something deeper. Hurt. I missed 4 years of my son's life. Do you know how that feels? Sophia wiped her tears. I know. And I'm so sorry. But I want to fix this. If you'll let me. David stared at her for a long time, his emotions flickering across his face. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady, but filled with something she hadn't heard in years, determination. I'm going to meet my son. Sophia nodded, her heart pounding. Okay. David took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. And Sophia? She looked up, bracing herself. This isn't over. You and I, we're not finished. Sophia felt something shift inside her. Maybe, just maybe, love was happening again. The flight to London was quiet. David sat next to Sophia in first class, staring out the window, deep in thought. She could feel his emotions, anger, frustration, and something else she couldn't quite name. She wanted to say something, to explain again, but what else was there to say? He had a son he never knew existed. She had taken that from him. Sophia sighed and turned to him. David. His jaw clenched, but he finally looked at her. Sophia, do you have any idea what you did? Her stomach twisted. I know. No, you don't, he said, his voice controlled but firm. You had my child, and you decided, on your own, that I didn't deserve to know. That I didn't deserve to be a father. Sophia swallowed the lump in her throat. It wasn't about you deserving it or not, David. It was about me being scared. I thought I was protecting him. David let out a humorless chuckle. From what? Me? She lowered her gaze. From the life you had. From all the business deals, the traveling, the pressure. I thought you wouldn't want him. David's expression hardened. That wasn't your decision to make. Sophia nodded, her fingers tightening around the fabric of her dress. I know that now. David exhaled, running a hand over his face. 4 years, Sophia. I missed 4 years. She hesitated before reaching for his hand, but he didn't move. You can still be in his life, she whispered. David finally turned to her, his eyes softer now. You don't have a choice anymore. I'm going to be in his life. Sophia nodded. I wouldn't have it any other way. David didn't respond, but something in his posture relaxed. Maybe there was still hope. London. The first meeting. Sophia's mother, Madame Elsie, lived in a quiet, upscale neighborhood in London. The house was warm and inviting, with a neatly trimmed garden in front. Sophia's hands were sweaty as they stood outside the door. She turned to David. Are you ready? David exhaled. I don't know. Before she could respond, the door opened, and Madame Elsie stood there, her sharp eyes scanning the scene. Sophia, she said, pulling her daughter into a hug. Sophia smiled. Mama? Then Madame Elsie turned her gaze to David, her expression unreadable. David Omoregi. David cleared his throat. It's good to see you, Ma. She studied him for a moment before stepping aside. Come in. Sophia led him inside, her heart racing. And then she saw him. Adrian. He was playing with his toy cars on the living room rug, his small face full of concentration. David stopped in his tracks, staring at the boy. His son. Adrian looked up at the new visitors and blinked. His big brown eyes, David's eyes, studied him curiously. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. David took a shaky breath and stepped forward. "Hey, buddy." Adrian tilted his head. "Who are you?" Sophia knelt beside her son, her voice gentle. "Sweetheart, this is David. He's—" She hesitated. David crouched down so they were eye level. "I'm your dad." Adrian blinked again. "My dad?" David nodded. "Yeah, kid. Your dad." There was a long pause. Then, to everyone's surprise, Adrian gave a small shrug. "Okay." David let out a shaky laugh, his eyes shining with emotion. "Okay?" Adrian nodded and picked up one of his toy cars. "Do you like race cars?" David smiled, his heart swelling. "I love race cars." Adrian grinned. "You can play with me then." David's throat tightened, but he nodded. "I'd love that." Sophia wiped a tear from her cheek as she watched them. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe. Maybe, just maybe, they had a chance at being a family. But she knew this was only the beginning. The next few days in London felt like a dream. Watching David and Adrian bond was something Sophia never thought she would witness, but here they were. Every morning, David would arrive at the house, and every evening, he would leave only after Adrian had fallen asleep. Adrian was fascinated by David, and in a way, David was just as fascinated by his son. "Watch this, Daddy," Adrian called out one afternoon, running across the garden with a paper plane in his hands. David's chest tightened at the word Daddy. It was the first time Adrian had said it, and it hit him harder than he expected. "I'm watching, little man," David said, crouching down to Adrian's level. Sophia stood at the doorway, watching them with a small smile. Tolu had called her earlier, that morning, asking if she was ready to go back to Benin City. But the truth was, she didn't know. Something had shifted between her and David in these past few days, and she wasn't sure how to leave it behind. She was still deep in thought when she felt someone standing next to her. "I told you this wouldn't be the end," David's voice said softly. Sophia turned to him, startled. "What do you mean?" David sighed, looking out at Adrian, who was still playing. "You and I, Sophia. I know things haven't been easy. And I know you kept something huge from me." Sophia lowered her head. "I was wrong, David. I know that now." David studied her for a moment, before gently lifting her chin. "I don't want to spend more time being angry. I want to spend time making up for what we lost." Sophia's eyes searched his. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," David said, stepping closer, "that I still love you, and I think you still love me too." Sophia's heart skipped a beat. "Tell me I'm wrong," David whispered. Sophia swallowed hard. "You're not." David let out a relieved breath. "Then let's stop pretending. Let's stop running." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes, but this time they weren't from sadness. She reached for David's hand, squeezing it tightly. "Okay." David smiled. Then, without hesitation, he leaned in and pressed his lips to hers. It was slow, deep, and filled with all the emotions they had buried for years. When they pulled away, Adrian ran up to them, completely unaware of the moment he had just interrupted. "Mommy, Daddy, come play," he said excitedly. David chuckled, lifting Adrian into his arms. "You got it, little man." Sophia laughed as she followed them outside. For the first time in a long time, everything felt right. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning of their love story, not the end. The end. Enjoyed the story? Don't forget to subscribe for more exciting love stories filled with romance, drama, and second chances. Share this story with your friends and let's keep the love going. Like, comment, and let me know. Do you believe in second chances in love? Hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more.